Everybody. I'm Nancy Davis, and welcome everybody to Cure Addiction Now. This is such an exciting group of people for me to even be sitting amongst. The brain power, the incredible stories, everything that everybody's doing here. It's such an honor to just be amongst all these brilliant doctors who are doing amazing things for Cure Addiction Now. I'll give you a little bit about my personal story. I had a son, Jason Davis, who was like the love of my life. He was in a movie when he was younger, and the star of the movie died later, Chris Farley, a long time ago, and he had an addiction problem, and Jason was just devastated. He was 12 years old when he did this movie, and he loved him, and he was like a hero. And after that, Jason was devastated, and one day he didn't know how to deal with his grief. So he wrote a script called Just One More Day. At the time, it was optioned for a TV movie of the week. It was, if you could bring that person back for 24 hours, what would you do? And it was really brilliantly written from the mind of a child who was just devastated with grief at that time for losing a friend. I knew that Jason would never become an addict, never. And he did events at his high school when he was younger to, be anti-drugs and all this stuff. So Jason never had a drink or a drug. And then all of a sudden, he was 21 years old. He had an injury to his back. He was at his brother's wedding. It was a stressful time. And Jason's friend said to him, if you smoke opium, your pain will go away. And so Jason tried it for the first time. He was that person who had a genetic predisposition to becoming an addict like that. And after that, at 21, after not having a drink or anything, because he was so anti it, he became that person. And it was a 12-year battle off and on, in and out of, rehabs and different things. And he so badly wanted to be sober. And it was a struggle. And he came to me one day and he said, "Mom, we have to start a charity called Cure Addiction Now. I know so many people who cannot get sober." He goes, "I've tried the 12-step program. It doesn't work for me. It works for some people. And if it works for you, it's great." He goes, "But I'm failing miserably, and we have to come up with more options that are science-based. We need to go into the laboratory." And he'd always helped me with my charity called the Race to Erase MS at that point. And we were getting FDA approval on a lot of drugs. When we started with that, there was no drug on the market and no hope that there would ever be. Today, excitingly with MS, there's 26 drugs on the market, so we proved them wrong. Jason was the greatest child. He was so fun, creative. He would never take no for an answer. Everything was sky's the limit, and he wanted to do everything. Becoming an addict destroyed so much of who he was in his life, and as a parent of somebody who's a child, it destroys your life because you want that child to be able to live life. And the calls you get in the middle of the night, you get a phone call, you're not sure if it's the police, the morgue, or somebody threatening your child to get money. You don't know what that phone call means in the middle of the night. So to this day, when my phone rings in the middle of the night, my heart just races. And I'm sure many people here can really relate to the feeling of what it's like to have an addict as a child. For so long, we shame addicts. We put them down. We feel like they have a choice. It's a disease. One day I was diagnosed with MS, knew nothing about it, didn't know where it came from, had nobody in my family. All of a sudden, that was my label. I had MS. One day, my son at 21 took his first drug, and he was labeled as that drug addict. People were nice and compassionate to me. They were not nice and compassionate to my child. And it's a terrible thing when you're an addict because people put you down. Part of Cure Addiction Now is we do not want anyone being shamed. Nobody chooses a disease chooses you. That is just how it goes. And we need to find things that are going to empower everybody so that they don't feel less of a person. So many people have an addiction and they don't know where to go for help. And there's all these rehab centers. And I think many of the rehab centers are meant to be, wonderful, but they very often the only job you can get after you've gotten out of rehab is to work in a rehab. And sometimes your sobriety is not very settled. And it's not a really good role model. It's not a good business model at all. This is why so many rehabs fail. And it's why insurance companies do not want to cover you in rehab because we have so many people that are falling off the wagon. I've talked to many people who whose children have gone to rehab, and there's been a technician there who has, in fact, been giving them drugs. As a parent, when you finally get your child to go to rehab, you feel like you have a little security blanket for a month. It's a fortune. Insurance is not covering it, and it's really tough. Wouldn't it be great if we could empower the rehabs and everybody with medications that will stop your cravings? Jason came to me when he wanted to start this, and he said, we need to deal with basic science research like we do with MS. We need to understand, why am I wired this way? I'm wired differently than you are. I'm wired differently than my other family members. He goes, I know better. I know that I've gone to rehab and it's miserable. I've made everybody miserable. I've done things I'm embarrassed about. But he said, why do I keep doing this? I'm smart. I'm smarter than this. I know better. But I have this craving. This craving is so intense, and we need to do something about it. So, Mom, we're going to start a charity called Cure Addiction Now, and we're going to do this. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know. So anyway, I said, I don't have any time. And he goes, you don't have any time not to do this. I'm like, okay. So we started this charity, and it was very complicated in the beginning to find the right team of doctors to help us. And I failed miserably in the beginning. I started cold calling doctors and, did not know what I was doing. There was not much research, because for about 25 years, there was very little research that was ever funded for addiction. The government will not fund any research that has to do with cravings. And if you think about addiction, it has everything to do with cravings. Our government should be funding it. Addiction is now the leading cause of death in our country for people 50 years old and younger. So we can't keep looking the other way, brushing this under the rug, and shaming people. This addiction is also about mental health. You can't separate the two. You might have had a mental health problem that brought you to being an addict, or because you're an addict, you have a mental health problem. You cannot cure one without the other. It goes hand in hand. And there is no reason to shame anybody that has any disease. So that's what we're advocating. In my travels, I finally met Dr. Kurt Rasmussen. And I went to NIDA one day, and I insisted with Dr. Nora Volkow that she lets me meet everybody that works at NIDA. And I met him, and it just all clicked. He knows where all the bones are buried. And he opened a lot of doors for me. And so he is the head of our scientific advisory board, and we have other brilliant doctors all here today too. So our goal is to cure addiction now. Not later, now. We are funding the most brilliant research with these brilliant doctors, and there's some in the audience that are not speaking today too, but they're all incredibly brilliant. They're all working really hard. They've been here for the last 3 days, meeting together and doing the most brilliant things. And my biggest dream, I say my prayers every morning, and I think what I'm grateful for. And I'm grateful for Jason. I'm grateful for Cure Addiction Now. I am grateful that we are all here, and we are funding some of the most amazing research. We need to raise way more money. We need to fund so much. It's just this wild west. There's so many areas of addiction and so forth, and we really need to get there. And so we fund these studies with these brilliant doctors, and we're always need to make more money, and we need to start making big inroads. But the only things that we fund are things that are going to happen quickly. We don't have the luxury of waiting for things that take 10 years and 20 years. We need to do things now. So that's what we're doing. So thank you all for being here. And that's my story. And I'm so grateful just to be sitting amongst this brilliant group of doctors.
Thanks, Nancy. My name is Kurt Rasmussen. I'm the chair of the Scientific Advisory Board here at CAN. I'm also the Chief Scientific Officer at Delix Therapeutics. And just want to thank Nancy and all the staff of CAN for putting this together and for forming this wonderful charity. And thank everyone for coming in the audience today and on the web. I know there's people attending. So thanks for your interest and your concern in our cause. I'm delighted, but also sad to be here today. I'm delighted to see the interest and the concern, but I'm sad for the reason that we're all here. Macbeth said it well, so fair and foul a day I have never seen. We're facing a historic danger right now in our country and in the world, historic. The overdose death crisis is nonstop. It's continuing, it's skyrocketing. It began a while ago. We call it the opiate crisis, but it's more accurately called the overdose death crisis because there's other drugs involved there as well. COVID came and went, and the opiate crisis, the overdose death crisis was still there, and it's getting worse now, much worse. Fentanyl is very, very difficult and very, very deadly. And it's not just fentanyl. There are compounds related to fentanyl that are out there as well. There's multiple types of fentanyl drugs out there. Cheap, easy to make, very deadly. And as if we didn't need another scourge, there's now another group of compounds that are just starting to emerge in Europe. Again, cheap, easy to make. They're called nitazines. Another synthetic opiate. It's having real massive problems in the UK. It'll probably spread around the world. So things are getting worse. It's really a historic danger. But we also have a historic opportunity. There are two compounds marketed on the market now, two types of compounds on the market for other indications, not approved for substance use disorder, but for other indications that seem to be helpful in substance use disorders. And we're going to talk a lot about them today. The GLP-1 agonists, better known as Ozempic and the weight loss, Wegovy and all those compounds, there's potential that they can be used for substance use disorders. And we've got experts here today to talk about that. And it's not FDA approved for substance use disorders. I want to emphasize that. But careful clinical study may be able to help us understand how to apply these things to substance use disorders. And we'll be doing a lot of the research into the science of how that occurs and maybe design even better compounds. And we're funding a lot of work to help in that regard. The other type of compound that's on the market already is a drug for insomnia. There are the orexin-1 non-selective orexin antagonists. You may have heard of one as Belsomra, marketed by Merck. There are now three companies with compounds like that on the market. Kelly Dunn has beautifully shown that compound can have potential for treating opiate use disorder and withdrawal. Very exciting, very solid science. It's not approved for substance use disorder yet. I just have to emphasize that. It's not FDA approved. Talk to your doctor. But there's real potential there that these compounds can help. So these are compounds that are already on the market that if we can study right, can get them shifted over to help patients that are in terrible need. In addition to that, there are compounds behind that coming forward that offer a lot of excitement, and we'll hear a lot about them today. Paul Kenny works on an orexin-1 antagonist that's coming forward, sort of a subset of the non-selective orexin antagonist. And there's even tazampanil is a compound out there for treating, stabilizing patients to getting them off opiates that is just beginning now clinical trials, a company called Proneris. There are really, really exciting things to come, but we need your support to help us get them there. Trials are expensive. You have to do them very carefully. A lot of work needs to be done, but I'm very hopeful that this is a really historic opportunity to match the historic danger that we're facing. So I couldn't be happier to have this incredible, we've assembled an all-star team. I mean, these are the best, believe me. I'll introduce the panel. I'm also delighted to have a patient advocate with us today who will share her story with us, Glynis Hodgkinson. And today we've got esteemed scientists. We've got Dr. Kelly Dunn from Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Scott Bunce from Penn State Health. Lorenzo Leggio will be joining us from the NIH via Zoom. Lorenzo. Ned Nunez, Dr. Ned Nunez from Columbia University. Kirsten Smith from Johns Hopkins. Sandy Comer, also from Dr. Sandy Comer from Columbia. Dr. Sharon Walsh from the University of Kentucky. Dr. David Olson from UC Davis. And Dr. Adam Kaplan, who is the CSO at MyMed Pharmaceuticals. And they've got really, really exciting things to share with you and to give you a feel for the hope and the things that we're working on, but also let you know this ain't easy. We need your help. I'm not going to be embarrassed to ask. This all costs money. So we are putting the money where it needs to be put to bring some novel things together. There's lots of types of funding, government funding, of course, pharmaceutical funding, not so much, but there's gaps out there, and we're funding the high-risk stuff that other people are afraid to fund. And I'm confident, fully confident, we'll be able to deliver new medications for this scourge that faces our society. So thanks for your attention. I'd like to now shift over to ask Glynis Hodgkinson, our patient advocate, to tell us about living with substance use. Glynis, please.
Hi. Thank you so much. My name is Glynis Hodgkinson. I want to just extend my gratitude and appreciation, Nancy, and all of you who are sitting here for the work that you're doing. It's really kind of an honor and also kind of a shock to be sitting in front of all of you today. I myself am a woman who has struggled with addiction, specifically opiate addiction, for a vast majority of my life. And if you would have told me 10 years ago that the experience of being an opiate addict would land me on a panel sitting with such smart people, I wouldn't have believed you. But I was asked to share some of my experience and some of my story. Nancy did mention, breaking the stigma, right, that's associated with addicts, and hopefully I can help with that. I grew up in Massachusetts, and I grew up in a relatively normal family. We all have our issues, but I didn't have drinking or drug use really in my house at all. My mom struggled with alcoholism, but got sober before I was born. So I grew up in a pretty dry household. It wasn't, abusive or anything like that. And I just like to say that because, I'm not sure how I ended up being a woman who struggles with addiction. I don't know if I was born with it. I don't know if there was a genetic predisposition. I don't know if it was something that happened to me that caused me to look for a relief. And honestly, it doesn't really matter at this point because it just is. At least it doesn't matter to me. But my substance use started with marijuana and alcohol, and I would say from the very first time that I started drinking and using, I had what I now know was an abnormal reaction, but I had only lived in my own experience, so I didn't really know it was abnormal. And when I say abnormal, I mean I wanted more, and I kept going, and I would overshoot the mark, and I would get really intoxicated. And by the time I was 14 years old, I was in my first inpatient detox facility. I was in an adolescent detox facility in Worcester, Massachusetts, called Motivational Youth Recovery. It doesn't exist anymore. I think it was one of two in the entire state. And I went there, and I was separated from my substances, and I got out, and I continued to use. And by 16, I was committed to the state of Massachusetts, and I was put in like a juvenile detention facility for almost 2 years. And then when I was released from that facility, I was in an all-girls treatment center. And that was really my first taste of physical sobriety for like an extended period of time. I think over the next few years, what happened is I was able to separate from substances for sometimes a week or a month, or at its longest, a year. But what would happen is I couldn't stay separated. Something would happen where I would think it was a good idea to go back just one more time. And this is the story that you hear from, most, if not all, addicts and alcoholics. The craving, as Nancy mentioned, was very real, but I didn't really have language to put to that experience as I was going through it. It was almost as if there was like a magnet in my body pulling me back to heroin. And oftentimes it would start with like the belief that I could just drink because alcohol wasn't my problem. And for me, what would happen is I would drink alcohol, and inevitably I would go back to using opiates. And sometimes that would take a little bit of time, and sometimes it wouldn't. But what would always happen is I would end up on opiates again. And once I started, it wasn't up to me when I stopped using them. So I tried everything. I tried seeing a psychiatrist. I was convinced that I was like clinically depressed or had deep anxiety or that it was my trauma. And I mean, I'm sure all of those things played a factor. But I would go and I would treat those symptoms and I would get medications and then it just wasn't enough. And I would end up using again because that was the one medicine that I thought worked for like my internal condition and my pain. I tried therapy. I tried moving. I moved from Massachusetts to Texas, essentially on a whim. And again, that would work for a period of time, but the time would always come where I would relapse again. And I tried everything. I went in and out of treatment centers, 43 detox facilities to be exact. I would go there and I would get physically separated from my substances, and then I would get out and I couldn't stay sober. The problem for me was not getting sober, it was staying sober. By the time I ended up in Los Angeles, a lot of people ask me if I came to Los Angeles to get sober, and the answer is no, because there are quite a few treatment facilities out here in Los Angeles. No, I came to visit and I just didn't leave. I was, I was in the midst of my addiction, and to be honest, the kind of the lows that I was brought to within my heroin addiction were pretty vast. I was living in MacArthur Park. If any of you are familiar with the California area, it's downtown LA near Skid Row. I had been stealing, I had been lying, I was just in and out of jail. And by the end, I had given up really the will to live or the hope that I was even capable of getting or staying sober. So I stopped trying. There was no detox facilities the last 4 or 5 years of my addiction. There was short stints of sobriety when I was incarcerated. And what ended up happening was I wound up in federal prison. And I laugh. It's not really that funny. It's funny now because, it's funny to me now. Maybe I have a dark sense of humor, but us addicts really have to laugh at our experiences, where we cry. And I wound up in federal prison. I was doing crazy things for money at the border. And I thought it was the worst day of my life. And the truth is, in hindsight, I think it was like a moment of grace. I think it was probably the best day of my life, arguably, although it didn't feel that way when I was in it. I think that the only way that I was going to be able to get this thing was to have like a forced, extended period of time where I didn't have access to any drugs or alcohol. And again, it wasn't the first time that I had been incarcerated. And so I don't think that that is the reason I'm sober. Just something happened, and I can't really explain what. But when I got out of that experience and I was back in the world with you guys, I had a deep feeling of hopelessness, and that sounds really sad, but I think it was for me a necessary part of the experience of being willing to do things that I had never been willing to do before. I no longer was looking for like a magic answer. For a long time it was methadone, or I would try Suboxone, things that helped me for an extended period of time, but I would just revert back. I decided to just change everything. When I say everything, everything. I started with nothing really when I got out of there. My dad is a postal worker. Like, I don't come from money. I come from a very middle class background. So I didn't have any resources. I didn't have insurance that was going to cover, a fancy treatment center. And so for me, I did end up going to a 12-step program, but that was one of the many things that happened. I also started therapy. I started working out. I started to have a little bit of hope, and I started just to have a little bit of humility and just put one foot in front of the other slowly but surely and slowly but surely. And once I kind of made this decision to change everything, everything changed. And for some people, it's a very slow process, but for me, my life changed really quickly. I was always the kid who was told I had so much potential, you know, and I started working out, for example. I got a job and like gained a little bit of humility, and I was taking the bus all the way to the San Fernando Valley from West Hollywood. I started to rebuild my credit score. I got a bank account. I mean, I just started to do these things. And but most importantly, like I came to a realization that these things that I just shared with you guys that I thought were going to be like a dark cloud over me, that were going to ruin my life, I thought I had wasted all my life. Here I am, a felon, right? A drug addict, no money, no resources. And I'm like, these things are going, I mean, I'm going to have a scarlet letter on me for the rest of my life. But it turns out that it was really the opposite. When I kind of embraced these things about myself and was willing to share it in rooms of strangers, my pain and my trials and tribulations actually offered me an opportunity to help other people, right? My experience allowed me to help other people. And so like my pain could become others' medicine, right? And I spend a lot of time in my personal life, you know, working with addicts who are still in it or early in their journey, specifically women, but men as well. I do a lot of service work as well. I'm on a planning committee for a place called Miriam's House that offers treatment and resources to women who have children. I'm the director of business development for a behavioral health organization, and we have 5 locations in the San Fernando Valley. I'm running my first marathon in a week and a half and raising money for, thanks, thank you guys, for addiction or people who lack resources like I did. I go to conferences. I'm a part of the National Association of Treatment Professionals, and we did a Hill Day this last year, and there's another one coming up in May. And so, again, like my experiences have given me like a unique ability to be helpful to other people and try to break the stigma that is associated with opiate addiction. And I think that's pretty much it. But I really appreciate you all listening to me, and I can't wait to hear from the rest of you.
Congratulations, and you're such an inspiration. Really quickly, just for a second, would you talk about, because we're sort of talking about today Narcan too, and the importance of, since Narcan does exist, everybody should know about it. And I know you'd had an experience being saved by Narcan. So if you would tell about that really briefly, sorry.
Yeah, no, of course. I've overdosed twice. Both times I was Narcan, but furthermore, I've Narcan quite a few people as it became more and more accessible when I was, still active in my opiate addiction. I always had it on me. I still have Narcan in my car because I'm just in contact with people who have a history of addiction. But there was a time that I told Nancy about where I was homeless, and somebody who I was with used fentanyl and overdosed. And this was maybe 7 years ago. It was, or 6 years ago. It was the nasal Narcan, but the piece at the top where you could put it in someone's nasal passage had broken off, and I actually injected him with it, and he survived. So it worked nonetheless, even though that wasn't necessarily the proper use. But I've seen people go from not living, gray, blue in the face, no breath, to standing up and walking, 3 or 4 minutes later. It really is a miracle. At the facilities that I work for, we discharge every client with Narcan, whether they have a history of opiate addiction or not. It really is a miracle drug. It's saved many lives, including my own. So.
But yeah, at the end today, we're going to do a little Narcan just exhibition, and hopefully you're going to help. And just everyone's going to leave with a Narcan, and just it's because it exists, it's a miracle. If you passed out from an opiate overdose in 4 minutes, you might have brain damage. In 6 minutes, you will be dead. If you call 911, it's going to take them at least 10 minutes. It's important that everybody's empowered to have Narcan on them at all times, in your glove compartment, in your purse, a backpack, whatever. Kids going to parties. My daughters insist on having that everywhere they go. My daughter left today for Mexico, and she was armed with lots of Narcan just in case. She says, "No, my friends don't do this." I'm like, yeah, right. It happens. No one's planning it, but we're going to show at the end today, and it's important because this exists, that everybody should be smart enough to know it and have it on them. So I'm sorry, I'm interrupting everything.
It's okay.
I always do that.
She's passionate. Let's proceed now from some of our great scientists about some of the latest developments. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Kelly Dunn from Johns Hopkins University. For my money, someone's doing some of the best work in this field right now. And she's going to tell us about the need for innovation in the treatment of substance use disorders. Kelly.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. Thank you, Nancy, for bringing us together, and thank you for that tremendous story. That was really impactful and wonderful. Thanks for being open to sharing that. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage for some of the other talks that are coming after me, to kind of share the unmet need that we have in the field with substance use disorder and talk about some of the existing trends. So as you know, we have, as Kurt mentioned, we have a significant problem with overdose in the country. We are currently losing, every year we have more people that succumb to fatal overdose than we had the preceding year. I think last year was over 120,000 people. That equates to about one person every 5 minutes in the United States. And there's lots of effort to try to expand access to the medications that we have available for substance use right now, but they are not keeping up with these trends and with the significant need, and things are just continuing to get worse. So throughout the country, heroin has been largely replaced, in many places fully replaced, with fentanyl, which is a highly potent opioid. It's much stronger than heroin, and it behaves differently in the body, so there's different medical consequences of its exposure. In addition, other medicines are being added to fentanyl that people are exposed to unwillingly or unknowingly, and a good example of that is xylazine. It's a heavy sedative. It doesn't respond to Narcan because it's not an opioid, and it causes significant medical comorbidities and consequences for people. An example is skin lesions. So they're having...
And it's known as trank. That's trank?
Yeah.
Right.
Trank dope. So it's having skin lesions that are requiring significant medical care for patients. In addition, we're finding huge increases in the number of people that are trying to offset these incredible sedative effects by co-administering stimulants like cocaine and methamphetamine with opioids. And so again, that increases the number of persons who are having overdose fatalities, but then also just increases the medical care necessary for patients. So now the medicines that we have are only going to work on certain domains of this, and they aren't going to work on the full condition. So we have a lot of need for innovation in the field. Just to set the context for you, in the past 50 years, if we exclude alcohol and nicotine use, we've had 4 medications developed for substance use disorders, 4, and they're all for persons with opioid use disorder. In the same period of time, the past 50 years, we've had 90 medications developed for depression. 90 medications, right? So we need innovation in this area, and part of the reason that innovation is somewhat slow is that the people that are funding it is really the national government, and they take a somewhat conservative approach. So these kind of high-risk, high-reward ideas that we have aren't really fundable by the national government, and the progress is slow. So I'll just give you an example. As Kurt mentioned, we have expertise in tapering patients off of opioids, and we've been looking at medications to withdraw patients for a long time. And we had an idea to look at Balsamra, which is an FDA-approved medication that we think is pretty safe, that we know is safe. And we wanted to look at it for sleep in people that were tapering off of opioids. And we pitched this idea to the national government, and it wasn't even reviewed. So we had no success at all, and we had to submit it several times, and it wasn't actually until Kurt came into the national government at the time, and saw the value of this medication, and we were able to get this funding. And so it took 4 or 5 years from the time that we first pitched the idea to have the funds available, and then it took us 3 years to run the study. And the results were really remarkable. So not only did we improve sleep significantly, and it's the only medication I've ever seen be able to produce the effects that we saw, we also significantly reduced their withdrawal and their craving. And I've never seen in any of the studies that I've reported, that I've read or that I've been involved with, we've never seen significant reductions in craving like we saw with this medication. And it's an FDA-approved med that's safe. And we knew that there might be effects several years prior, but it took us, close to a decade to get those results. And we're doing a follow-up study with this now, but still, it's, we're 3 years into a 5-year study, and it moves slow, right? And it's much more slow than what the public needs, because we can move this slowly, but we're seeing the introduction of all these different medications into the drug product rapidly. And so a good example of the niche that CAN is filling is that they've provided us funding to look at the stimulant co-use. So we think this med might also work to help people manage their cravings for cocaine and methamphetamine as well when they're using opioids. And so they immediately gave us those funds, and we were immediately able to implement that and to study that. And if we get positive results, we'll be able to go to the government and say, look, we've already got evidence, and then that's going to escalate or accelerate our ability to get these meds. And so I think there's opportunity for growth. The FDA has opened up new pathways for us, but the process is slow, and we don't have this investment in the field like other fields of psychiatry and medicine do, and that's the I guess gap that CAN is filling for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, I just want to emphasize one thing, a couple things Kelly said. NIDA and the NIH is doing a wonderful job. They've got a lot of very talented people, and there's a lot of money, a lot of grant money. The HEAL initiative is doing a wonderful job. However, there are gaps. It's sometimes hard to get things that are funded without some pilot data, some early data. And this is a very important role that philanthropy can fill and make a huge difference. Take some of those ideas, let the brilliant scientists run with it, improve it, and then when they get that pilot data, then leverage that into bigger either grants from the government or a private industry to the larger sums of money. But that initial idea to get that funded is really, really hard to do, and that's the gap. I worked in large pharma, I worked at the government, I saw what each of them can do, but this is the missing gap, especially for substance use disorders. There's really, really critical work that we were delighted to fund with Kelly because she knows what she's doing. And so we can put these funds to great use. Your donations will go put to wonderful use to be leveraged into much larger grants and funding. So in a way, you'll leave a legacy behind you by getting this money, getting the right thing started. Okay, so I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Scott Bunce from Penn State, who's doing some of the most exciting work right now in the field, running a clinical trial with GLP-1 agonists, an Ozempic-type medication for treating opioid use disorder. Very exciting results coming in. And Scott, can you tell us more about it, please?
Thank you. I thought I was going to start with the Ozempic jingle, but I figured you would kind of tune me out for the rest of the talk. And I think many of you have heard there are a lot of anecdotes out there of people being on these medications which were originally developed for type 2 diabetes and then were also approved for addressing weight disorder, that people on them all of a sudden either stop drinking or stop smoking, and saying, just don't need that anymore. And those are a lot of anecdotes, and anecdotes are not science, but that same mechanism is an endogenous mechanism that is part of our satiety system, right? So when you have that big Thanksgiving dinner and you've eaten that third piece of pie, and your brain says, no more. So this is part of that system. And these medications allow that to stay in your system for a lot longer time than our natural ones do. And my colleague Sue Grigson wondered, can we use this to stop heroin taking in rats? So we got some pilot data, submitted it. She did some really nice work, and we got funded by NIDA's HEAL initiative to run a human randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial to see if this can actually knock down craving in humans. And you've heard it's sometimes very difficult to have craving as an end target in these studies, but we were able to put that in and get funded. And we ran this at a very high-end residential treatment center, the Cairn Treatment Center out in Warnersville. So we could do it within a very safe environment and pay quite a bit of attention to what we were doing. And one of the things that was really important about running this study is that we had them rating their cravings in real time using smartphones. This is an app developed by Tim Brick at Penn State, who's also our collaborator. And we were able to get people on this while they were in early treatment. So most of them had just come off of an opioid the day before they walked into the center. And so shortly after they got out of the need to have the drug right away, right? We were recruited them into the study, and it was a 21-day study. And if you know anything about the medications, you have to ramp these up slowly because it can cause GI distress. And so we followed those protocols, and we were able to get 20 individuals into the study. And these individuals were given the opportunity of whether or not they wanted to be on one of the other medications for opioid use disorder. And in this case, all of them were on buprenorphine, but they chose whether or not they wanted to be on that. So 13 of them were on buprenorphine, 7 of them chose not to be. And what we found was that even at the lowest dose, people who were on we tested liraglutide, which is a once-a-day treatment. Even at the lowest dose, people reported significantly less craving over the time that they were on that medication. We did not have it. Not everybody finished the trial, and part of that was because of the GI distress. Part of that was because something changed in their insurance and they left the treatment center, et cetera. So it was a small study, and we need to replicate it in a much larger sample. But there were a couple other really important findings. So besides the fact that it stopped craving, and it stopped craving whether or not they were on buprenorphine or not, they did stay in the study better with buprenorphine, and so we're going to continue to look at that. But it also showed that by day 10, people were able to say they had zero craving by day 10, coming immediately out of detox, and 10 days later being able to say you have zero craving is a pretty impressive statement. So hopefully we will be able to see this. We're now conducting a larger trial, and hopefully this holds out some hope as another medication that will help folks that struggle with craving and with opioid use disorder.
Oh, question, yes, please. No.
So in our rat models, stop the medication, your protective factor goes away. So it's not something that makes sense because in the endogenous mechanism, if you stopped eating and then just kept stopping eating, you would starve to death, right? So it's a short-acting mechanism because it's part of that feeding cycle, right? You got to eat again, then you got to stop. So it's part of that cycle. It makes sense, but yes, so you have to stay on the medication.
Thank Thanks for the question. Okay, now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Lorenzo Leggio, who I had the wonderful opportunity to get to know when I was at NIDA. Does a fantastic scientist, does great work, and he joins us via Zoom. He's the NIDA, the clinical director at NIDA, at IRP, and he's going to tell us about Ozempic and GLP-1 analogs as potential treatments for addiction that was fueled by the evolution of social media. Lorenzo, please.
Thank you, Kurt. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Wonderful. And sorry I cannot be there, in person, but I'm delighted to join all of you remotely, and thanks for having me. Yeah, so I will follow on what Scott was saying before about this drug, and not just Ozempic, although Ozempic semaglutide is actually possibly the most promising that we see right now, but it is a class of drugs, including semaglutide. I would say Ozempic, just to, for simplicity, it is a new class of drug that has been proven to be quite remarkably effective for diabetes. And the two of them, Ozempic, semaglutide, also called Wegovy, is also approved for obesity as well. And we have been working in my program primarily on the potential role of Ozempic in alcohol use disorder. But in a sense, as Scott pointed out, these medications do have a potential for addicted disorders, including opioid, alcohol, and possibly smoking and stimulants as well. Some of the work we have done in my program with patients with alcohol use disorder has been to show how alcohol is actually affecting this hormone. As Scott pointed out, this is a hormone we all have produced by our gut. And the hormone regulates our sugar in our blood and also regulates our appetite. And that's why it does work on diabetes and obesity. So we have done some work in patients with alcohol use disorder. We have shown that when people drink excessively amounts of alcohol, there is an impairment in the endogenous hormone, both in terms of the levels of the hormone in the blood, and also in terms of the expression of the receptor of this hormone in the brain. And then we posed the question whether, in fact, using Ozempic, this drug may reduce excessive alcohol drinking. And we used two animal models, one model in the mice of binge drinking, and one model in the rats of alcohol dependence. And we, but not just us, so the people as well have shown that in fact semaglutide does, Ozempic, it does dose dependently reduces excessive alcohol drinking, both in this mouse model and in this rat model of alcohol drinking. I'm a physician scientist, so my main job is actually to do studies with patients. So based on this animal work, now what we are doing is actually in the NIH in Baltimore, the Bayview campus, we are conducting a randomized clinical trial with patients with alcohol use disorder, where we are basically seeing if a 5-month treatment with Ozempic compared to placebo is going to reduce alcohol drinking, alcohol craving, and other variables as well, including we're looking at mood, anxiety, food craving, etc. Now, in parallel to this more classical academic work where you have some initial pilot findings, then you go back to the bench, you test your hypothesis, mice and rats, and now you bring back to the clinic with this randomized clinical trial. In parallel, as Scott already said, there has been a lot of anecdotal reports from people saying, you know, doctor, you gave me Ozempic for my obesity, for my diabetes. I don't feel the desire any longer to drink alcohol and to, for example, to smoke cigarettes. So this has been, I had to say, posing an interesting question. We have been reached out by mass media, including CNN, Washington Post, etc. And one question we get from reporters is, why are you even doing this randomized clinical trial? Why don't we just jumpstart to give Ozempic to all people with addiction? it's a tricky question, I had to say, and actually not easy to answer. But I would say that part of me will say, well, we need to be cautious. We heard during COVID that there were many claims that ivermectin was going to cure COVID. And we know by now that, in fact, that's not true. So it is important to keep in mind the importance of gold standard clinical trials in medication development before you really bring a medication to clinical practice. Also, yesterday we were talking about the importance of making sure that these medications are safe when we give these medications to people with alcohol use disorder. For example, some people have a concern about these medications possibly increasing risk of changing mood or even suicide. We don't think right now that the risk is high, but it's still on the table as a question. People with alcohol use disorder are at the risk of pancreatitis. Semaglutide or Ozempic may also give a pancreatitis. So there are safety questions that we want to look at very carefully. But I want to close it by saying, nonetheless, I feel strongly this is actually perhaps the most exciting time in addiction clinical research. I've been in this business for 20 years of doing studies with patients with addiction. And the fact that Ozempic is making everybody talk about its potential for addiction, it means that now all the community people hear about addiction. People are going to their doctors and say, can you prescribe me Ozempic? But even if the answer is no, because the doctor will say, we don't have enough data, now clinicians have the opportunity to engage people, say, there are medications approved for alcohol use disorder. There are medications approved for smoking cessation. There are medications approved for opioid use disorder. So in a sense, there is a lot of discussion and there is a lot of potential now to really engage patients to have a treatment for addiction now with the currently available medication. And the last thing I want to mention is, as you all know here, the number of people who receive treatments for addiction is very low. And again, regardless of whether we will show if Ozempic works or not for addiction, I think it's going to be critical that it will be a sort of a exemplar of how not just the psychiatric addiction medicine doctors, but how even primary care physicians should and could be able to treat addiction the same way how, for example, many primary care doctors feel comfortable to treat the depression with SSRI. And I will stop here and happy to answer any question. And again, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Fascinating. So there's obviously some very, very important studies going on with GLP-1 antagonists, or agonists, sorry. There's, I think, about 8 different clinical trials going on around the country right now. But we have to do very careful clinical work to make sure that this is the effect we really want. These things aren't candy. There are side effects. And we've got now an expert, Dr. Ned Nunez from Columbia, who an expert in clinical trials. He's going to tell us about novel medications for substance use disorders and designing the clinical trials to bring them to market. Ned.
Okay, thank you. Again, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited to see all the interest and energy in like this Cure Addiction Now. I'm a physician, a psychiatrist specializing in addiction psychiatry and addiction medicine. I got interested in studying treatments for substance use disorders. Over 30 years, I was working in a group that was studying treatments for depression. We got interested in treating depression in people with substance use disorders. Talking about stigma, at the time, there was a contingent of clinicians in the field who would tell us that we were misguided, that we were enabling the patients, that depression did not exist in patients with substance use disorders, that the patients just needed to work harder on their addiction. Of course, now, fortunately, as a result of a great deal of research done, it's well recognized that depression, trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, many of these mental health disorders have a role to play in addiction and should be recognized and treated if they're there. So I became involved in running large clinical trials of treatments for substance use disorders. And as Dr. Leggio was pointing out, we need these trials to make sure that the treatments work and to really get systematic data about how they work and whether or not they are safe. Fortunately, NIH and the National Institute on Drug Abuse have been quite forward-thinking and generous, really, in funding large trials. My group is part of something called the NIDA Clinical Trials Network, which has been in existence for over 20 years and has funded dozens of large clinical trials of treatments for substance use disorders. And the HEAL initiative we mentioned, which was a large infusion of funds for treatment, including trials that came about for the pandemic as the opiate crisis was escalating. And we certainly need advocacy to the government to encourage the government to continue to fund these efforts. When I got started in the field, there was really very little investment by the pharmaceutical industry in treatments for substance use disorder. The pharmaceutical companies have an important role to play because at the end of the day, if a treatment's going to be available, something like Ozempic for opioid use or alcohol use disorder, that medication is expensive, and for it to be available to patients, it needs to be approved by the FDA, and that means that the company that manufactures it needs to really support the effort because it's their medication. It's not our medication, and so we need advocacy to encourage the industry partners to really get behind this. So in terms of exciting medications and treatment efforts that are coming along, there's the GLP agonists like Ozempic, which are promising. There is the suvorexant that was mentioned, which is works on the orexin system and helps with sleep. Sleep is another one of those co-occurring problems that are frequently observed in patients with substance use disorders and that need to be looked at and treated: sleep, pain, depression, anxiety, and so forth. There are other medications being developed. There are non-invasive brain stimulation approaches like transcranial magnetic stimulation. All of these approaches are exciting, and they need these large trials to really out the next step. Just a final step I'll comment on is we do a large trial, we show that it's effective and safe. Now it needs to be implemented and made available widely community, and that's yet another challenge which needs a lot of advocacy. There's all kinds of barriers. It's very frustrating to have a medication like buprenorphine developed through clinical trials, largely funded by National Institute on Drug Abuse, actually. It's extremely effective for treatment of use disorder, and yet it's not widely available. Most patients with opiate use disorder in the country are still not being treated with it, and there's all kinds of barriers, and so we need to work on bring those barriers, making treatment more available. So thank you again for your attention.
Question, please.
Yes, absolutely.
We've got actually someone who will be speaking about that.
coming up.
Yeah.
It's okay.
No, it's part of a whole. There's a whole exciting renaissance of the use of different psychedelic medications. They were widely used in the 1950s. And there's actually a lot of research from the 1950s, and all that work was forgotten. But it's
So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Paul Kenny from Mount Sinai School of Medicine. Paul, we've talked about two different topics here, and Paul is in the center, right in the middle of studying both topics, the GLP-1 agonist. He's looking at, Ken is very happy to fund some of his work looking at the Ozempic. When I say the GLP-1 agonist, we see it's maybe it's working, but now how is it doing in the brain? What is it doing? Figuring that out so we can design even better ones. And so Paul's very on the forefront of that work. He's also working on the orexin angle as well with a more selective orexin compound. So, and we've been very happy to have him here and support a lot of his work. So, Paul, give us more detail on that, please.
Sure. I mean, we've heard a lot already about the promise of Ozempic and GLP-1 agonists as potential treatments for substance use disorders. Heard a wee bit about Belsomra, and may think that that's all great, which it is, but it does sound very much like a case of serendipity striking twice. Like we're just lucky. These drugs were developed for other disorders, other conditions, and if they happen to work for substance use disorders, that's great. That's not actually true. So we've known about these systems for well over a decade, close to 2 decades, and their potential involvement in substance use disorders. In many cases, they were recognized for their potential involvement in substance use disorders before medications developed based on those same systems for other conditions. And so we have known about those potential molecules and what they could be used for. And so it's wonderful to see that those compounds that have been developed now look like they're working in human addicts, but there's been animal work available from labs like mine and many others predicting exactly that. And so that's great because it means the types of preclinical experiments that we do may have predictive validity, that what we do in a mouse or a rat when they become hooked on drugs could potentially predict what could happen to some degree, at least in humans, and may predict efficacy. And one of the reasons why we've not been able to move from mouse and rat work into human work is in terms of industry involvement, industry engagement. And so we have good targets, I would argue. We do know a lot about what happens in the brains of people being exposed for extended periods of time to drugs abuse. And we can and really should be doing better in terms of delivering the medications that people desperately need. But without industry engagement, it is really, really tough. And that's where foundations like CAN step in, where you can begin to take those ideas and test them and hopefully begin to move towards the clinic, get closer to where industry need us to be before they'll be interested in taking a risk and developing substance use disorders. It is a risk for them. And so one thing I'm trying to do, can support and with collaborators, is to take a target that we think is good. You heard a wee bit about it. We heard about suvorexant, which is an orexin receptor antagonist. It's a sleep aid, but that drug actually works by hitting 2 receptors, 2 orexin receptors. One is really important for sleep. The other one is not thought to be involved in the mechanism of action of suvorexant. It's called the orexin 1 receptor. It's thought to be important for motivation states. And been known for nearly 20 years that that receptor really plays a key role in regulating motivation for drugs abuse. So we think that perhaps some of the efficacy that Kelly has seen in humans could reflect the fact that suvorexant is blocking the orexin 1 receptor, which is not necessarily important for its sleep effects. So if we could design a selective orexin 1 receptor antagonist that could deliver the anti-craving effects that we need in a medication, but without enhancing sleep properties. In other words, you could really block that receptor and hopefully deliver a nice therapeutic response. And so that's the hypothesis that we're trying to test. A program going on in my lab, and also with some collaborators. We have a compound that's in human that we're safety testing. We've partnered with AstraZeneca, and it's continued to look okay. Later this year, we'll actually ask that exact question. We'll test the drug in people who are suffering from opioid use disorder. That's but one example of what can be accomplished. There's lots of other targets out there. They're not being pushed towards the clinic because we don't have the support from industry. And I really think that that is it's awful. We need to do better.
I'd now like to introduce Dr. Kirsten Smith from Johns Hopkins University. She's going to tell us about Kratom.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. It's my first time here, and so I'm going to kind of go to something that is very, very, very not in the pipeline, and it's not approved for anything, and it's actually a very old substance that's been around for, really hundreds of years that we know of. So Kratom, has anyone here heard of Kratom? It's sold, yeah. So there are products available. They're not approved by FDA, but they are sold in the United States. And it's an interesting story. I had not heard about kratom until it was like 2016. I was working in an addiction treatment center, and there was a young man, 27 years old, had been addicted to Oxycontin, comes to me and says, "I'm using this thing called kratom." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "It's a tea from Asia." And at first I thought it was a synthetic drug, but he's like, "No, it's not. It's a plant. It helps me with my opioid cravings and my anxiety. And I feel good, but I don't feel high." And I'm like, okay, well, who cares? And I kind of did not realize the clinical significance of that statement at the time. And he ends up getting kicked out of treatment for using this, and a few other people did as well. Tries to do abstinence only. He was discouraged from using buprenorphine, and ends up trying heroin for the first time about 2 weeks after being kicked out of treatment, dies of a heroin overdose. And I'm not saying I know that kratom would have helped him. I have no idea. But I know that for this young man, for a period of time, this was seemingly helping him. And since that time, I have done nothing but study other people like this young man. And so we have a very interesting situation in which we have a lot of anecdotal self-reports that has been assessed in various ways, including via smartphone app and case reports and things like this. We don't have strong or robust lab-based data, right? And that's what we need. So in order to take this signal of self-report among people who are trying to recover from opioid use disorder, stimulant use disorder, we really need to examine kratom and really the molecules that are in this very complicated botanical, right? It's when I say kratom, we kind of it sounds like one thing. It's really many different molecules wrapped up in this complex botanical package that we need to start looking at both individually, but also in combination. And so for me, kratom has been part of the US polydrug epidemic, and it's kind of like this redheaded stepchild that a lot of people don't know about. Sorry, you have red hair. I did not mean to say that. But my point is, it's not receiving the attention, and certainly not the scientific funding that it deserves. Right. So we have some really robust preclinical models, and NIDA has funded some kratom research, but not a lot. And so we know a few things that are helpful in pointing us in the right direction. So we're not seeing respiratory depression related with some of these molecules. We're not seeing, at least not yet, not with the products as of right now, and that there's more stimulatory effects, right? So even though some of these molecules act on the opioid receptor, they act on all of these other different systems in the human body. So it's not a quote-unquote opioid full stop. And some of the anecdotes, too, really indicate that there's a very strong stimulatory effect. And even among people who've never had a substance use disorder, they're using it as a kind of pre-workout for energy, coffee replacement. So it's a very interesting substance, to say the least, that we are just in our infancy of beginning to understand in humans. And so I think going back to some of the sentiments that were shared earlier, NIDA and NIH, are just pivotal in moving things forward, but the federal government is very slow. And again, like I could put in a great grant application to study kratom, and it could take a year and a half to get funded. And we have people dying like right now. So this needs to have been funded, a year ago, yesterday, today. And industry is in a place too where this is a very odd substance. It's not easy to study because of how many different minor alkaloids and then a major alkaloid called mitragynine. It's not easy, right? And so I think it's important, and I think all of us on this panel, if it were easy, everyone would do it, right? Like we're trying to do very difficult things that take a long time, even when it's fast. But with respect to kratom, I think there's nothing but promise in terms of what is available. And I should say we're in very early days. So we need safety studies, we need safety and tolerability, we need to demonstrate, again, we have good signals, but until we demonstrate safety, tolerability within healthy volunteers, we can't even move into clinical trials where we're examining endpoints like reduction in craving or abstinence or any other relevant outcomes. So with that, I will just, again, thank CAN for all that they're doing, and really, it's great to be here with all of you wonderful people, so thanks.
Thank you, Kirsten. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Sandy Comer from Columbia, and she's going to tell us about her work with vaccines and monoclonal antibodies in the treatment of opioid use disorder and opiate overdose. Sandy, please.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be. The vaccines for treating opioid use disorder are patients will and they get we're thinking that the vaccine has standalone or they can be a combination. The advantages of the vaccine they are selected have now we're also developing so they should be effective in targeting cross react. So patients can be can you hear me now? Okay. So we're thinking, I mean, we know from the data that have been collected in clinical trials so far that patients who start on one of the existing medications, we'll call them MOUDs, they're medications for opioids. After about 6 months, half of them will relapse. So that's, that's unfortunate, and it's a glass half full, glass half empty kind of number that I think about. I mean, I'm really glad that half of the patients are still in treatment and doing well, but there's a half that, are relapsing. So we're expecting that the vaccine will produce long-lasting effects. So if somebody has started on buprenorphine, for example, and then relapses after 6 months, the vaccine should still be active. The antibodies that the vaccine has generated will still be there. So if somebody, relapses and starts using again, at the very least, the antibodies will protect them from overdose. And at the very best, it will give a clinician a window of opportunity to re-engage them in treatment. So that's one, thing that we're thinking that would be helpful for using this vaccine. Another area that we're really exploring is that the vaccines could potentially also be used as a prevention. For somebody who's at really high risk of developing the disorder, somebody who has been injured and started on opioids and that they have other risk factors that might lead them in that direction, this might help them. For somebody who has a family history or other risk factors, it might be enough to prevent them from developing the disorder to begin with. So we're really excited about this approach. We're currently running a phase 1 first-in-human study of the vaccine. So this is the first opioid vaccine that has been tested in the US. We haven't broken the blind yet in our study, but we did a pilot study that the FDA asked us to complete. And we
looked at the antibody levels. So we're testing placebo, a low dose, and a high dose of the vaccine. So we looked at the antibody levels. The proportion of patients who show a good vaccine response, so their antibody levels are high, they're the ones who are also showing reductions in oxycodone-mediated effects. So we're testing a challenge dose of oxycodone. We're seeing reductions in drug liking, in feeling high, in craving. So those were all really fantastic signals. We're really excited about that. One of the things that was most striking to me, because I've been doing this research for a long time, so opioids characteristically produce a decrease in pupil diameter. So this is a physiological effect that is kind of, a landmark of an opioid effect. So oxycodone produces this as well. In people with high antibody levels, that effect also is blocked completely. So, the antibodies are definitely preventing the drug from getting into the brain. And we think this has another, this will be another tool that clinicians and patients can use to combat this disorder. So I'm really happy again that CAN is doing what it's doing. The NIH process is really slow, as we've heard, other people talk about. So I think we need CAN for three main reasons. One is to fund the high-risk, high-gain projects, right? So these traditionally are not things that NIH will fund. It CAN also funds new investigators to collect pilot data. And this is critical for a young scientist to start to apply for grant applications. It makes them competitive. It's really hard to get these NIH grants. And then the third one is also really important, and it resonates really well with me, is that they can fund projects quickly, right? So, thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Sharon Walsh from the University of Kentucky, and she's going to talk to us about how much naloxone is needed to reverse an opioid overdose. Findings from the field. Sharon, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Kurt, for inviting me here. Nancy, thank you for all that you're doing. It's really a pleasure to be associated with this group. This is my first time. And Glynis, thank you for sharing your story with us. It's very courageous, and it gives a lot of hope. So I'm going to talk not about a new drug, but I'm going to talk a little bit about an old drug, and that's naloxone, and you've already heard about it. You heard about it from Glynis, and you've also heard about it from Nancy, and she's got some in her lap, I think.
I just
There you
thought,
go.
since you're talking about it, and and also today when everybody leaves, we're going to give this to you. So this is like a lifeline to save someone's life, but more so than you could ever dream of. So everybody needs to learn how. But please talk. I'm interrupting you.
No, you're
I'll put it
giving
here.
me the segue into my what I want to share. So, so naloxone is an old drug. It's been around for a really long time, and we know that it's very effective at reversing opioid overdose and has saved a tremendous number of lives. We actually don't know how many lives have been saved by naloxone because we don't track it. Naloxone is also a little bit unusual because up until very recently, it was only available by prescription, and that would mean that you'd have to get it from a doctor and then from a pharmacy. But several years back, there were a lot of good community-based agencies that recognized the need for naloxone in order to try and tackle the increasing opioid overdose crisis. And so they made the argument that maybe, even though it's by prescription, maybe we should be changing regulations at the state or local level so that we could give it to community partners or public health places, departments, or harm reduction agencies. And in fact, most of the naloxone that's in our community right now, that's where it comes from. And so, as everyone knows, the opioid crisis keeps changing its complexion, and now we're in the era of fentanyl and have been for a while. And fentanyl is much more highly potent than the drugs that preceded it in the crisis, than the prescription opioids or heroin. And a few years back, I started noticing that there were reports coming out, small reports, some anecdotal, saying naloxone doesn't work in people who are overdosing from fentanyl, or small case report studies of 20 people saying these people needed 2 or 3 or 4 doses and it still didn't even work then. And, this is a question that we can answer empirically. It is more potent, so perhaps more is needed. But what I was mostly concerned about is that there's just a tremendous amount of stigma in this field against people who use drugs, against people who treat those who use drugs, against the medications that we use to treat people who use drugs. And that tends to reduce access to those medications. And I was very concerned that if this was not true, that the idea that you would need more and that it would then cost more could actually have a dampening effect on community health programs and their willingness to provide naloxone to the individuals that need it. And my personal belief is that we should saturate every single community with naloxone to the extent possible so that everybody is prepared to protect somebody against an overdose. And so, as I said, there were these reports coming out, and then there was a study that was published that said that they looked at communities where they had more naloxone, and that those communities actually had more overdoses. Okay, this is kind of what we call junk science. But those things get legs in the press, and they can have an impact. And so what we decided to do was to partner with one of our state agencies that actually has a huge amount of data on overdose, and that's our EMS system. So I'm from Kentucky. In Kentucky, we have 120 counties. We have 230 EMS responding agencies that when someone calls 911, there's an overdose, they come out and treat that person. And so rather than looking at, 3 case reports or 29 cases that came to the hospital, we looked at almost 34,000 cases of opioid overdose that went from 2018 to 2021. And what we did was we took all of the records to try and discover what dose of naloxone was actually used. So a couple of key take-home messages. One was that of those 34,000 cases, in each year, more than 99% of those people were saved by this response, by naloxone. So this is something that we don't tend to count. Over those same years in Kentucky, we had about a little over 6,000 individuals die of an opioid overdose. So if you add those 6,000 people with the 99% of the 34,000 cases that we looked at, we would have had 6 times as many deaths potentially in Kentucky and in every other one of our states if we don't have our EMS systems responding. So this is important, and I want to say that, EMS is a critical piece here in responding to overdoses, but there's lots of people like Glynis and others who are carrying naloxone and saving people, and the emergency services are never being called, that we're not even really counting in any critical way. The other important thing that we discovered was that over the course of the study, there was almost no change in the dose of naloxone that was used to reverse these opioid overdoses. So the average dose for all these cases went from 4.2 milligrams, and in the box that Nancy's going to give out to you, these are 4 milligram doses in the intranasal formulation. Yep. And this has 4 milligrams in it. So the average dose was 4.2 at the start of the study, and by the end of the study, it was 4.4. So only a 0.2 milligram increase. And what we wondered was, what was happening with fentanyl in Kentucky at the same time? Were we seeing, if it was flat and, we didn't see any change, that would maybe change the interpretation of our results. But what we did is we looked at the changes in fentanyl and fentanyl analog involvement in the overdose death cases, and we put that into the model where we were looking at naloxone dosing. And then we also worked with our state police department to look at how many of their drug seizures when people were arrested had fentanyl, and was that changing over time. And as you can imagine, our fentanyl-related overdoses were changing significantly over the course of the study, as were the rate of fentanyl-related seizures. But the naloxone dose that was effective to save lives was, negligibly changed. And so I think one of the things that I've been very involved in developing medications over the course of my career, but I've also been very frustrated by the fact that we get them onto the market, and as Ned said, then people can't actually have them. So with, buprenorphine and methadone, less than 10% of the people get access to it that potentially could benefit from it, and they're life-saving. And so I was, concerned about the availability of naloxone for that same reason, because there are just so many people who are opposed to any form of harm reduction, and they'll use data that they get or that they read in the newspaper as an argument for not spending money at the local level, for instance, to fund programs that provide naloxone. And so I think that by leveraging this really large data set that happened to be available, we're able to kind of empirically demonstrate that, no, these reports, that doesn't mean that there might not be some individuals that need more, but in general, this is a very effective drug that is still effective even in the context of the fentanyl crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Question, please.
Just definition. Kentucky fentanyl and California fentanyl may not be the same fentanyl.
Agree.
In California, our supply of fentanyl is such that the amount of naloxone, because the Narcan essentially has the monopoly on distribution of naloxone, at least in our state. My record of Narcan is 21 Narcans before the commission showed me the size of the bottle. Wow. Our patients end up in intensive care unit to reduce their care. So our fentanyl here may not be the same fentanyl.
So, yeah, I appreciate your comment about that. So I think that there are a couple of other things that we need to consider. And if everybody in the audience couldn't hear that, the person asking the question said that they're from California and that California and Kentucky fentanyl may not be the same. It's all mostly coming from Mexico, so I'm not really sure how different it is, but that's something that we can also test empirically. And as I said, there certainly are cases where people need more. I would challenge you actually to go and do the same study with the data source so that we can have an answer. I mean, it's very important to understand whether or not there are these meaningful differences. The other thing is that the illicit drug supply has so many other things in it right now. And oftentimes, especially when it's a new addition, we're not actually doing the toxicology to understand what the person has. And so the xylazine crisis that, really emerged in Kensington area, Philadelphia, now is starting to spread, and now hospitals and other places are starting to screen for it. We still don't have a CLIA waiver test, so there's all those kinds of challenges. And so when someone presents with an overdose, you don't know as the responder or the physician even what it is that you're trying to reverse. And when you have other drugs on board like benzodiazepines or xylazine that are not an opioid but are contributing significantly to the respiratory depression and depression of other important systems, you wouldn't expect that naloxone would work the same way. So I think that your point's really well taken, and we know that there are patients that may need more. I'm an advocate for using as much as you possibly can. I'm an advocate for saving everybody. That's what the goal is. But I certainly don't want weak quality evidence that gets out there to have a dampening effect on our ability to have access to naloxone and to respond to it. To your other point about that there's, kind of one player with one dose, we have a number of other formulations of naloxone that have been approved by the FDA over the last couple of years, including some that are higher dose formulations, and we're just beginning to get some data about those as well from the field. So, thank you.
Thanks for the question. We'll have time for more questions at the end. We've got two more presenters that I'd like to get to. We've got Dr. David Olson from UC Davis. There was a question earlier about Ibogaine. David's going to tell us about Ibogaine treatment for substance use disorders, problems and potential solutions. Yeah, if there's any people can submit
Yeah,
questions.
for the end, we're going to do a lightning round, and we would love your questions then. If you guys want to write them down and send them up here, we would really like those questions, and they'll be given to the correct doctor who can best answer. I want to say one more thing really quickly about fentanyl, because I think we didn't say exactly what it is. When people are getting drugs now, China seems to be sending fentanyl to Mexico, and all the Mexican drug lords are able to press this into every single drug that looks like a familiar drug to you. It could be an antidepressant, it can be heart medicine, a Quaalude, whatever. If you buy anything on the street, not in a pharmacy, you have a 90% chance, if not more, that that drug will have fentanyl. So what is fentanyl? It's the equivalent of you having at least 50 to 100 shots of heroin. Do you think your body can withstand that? No. It's deadly. It is coming into our country every day. There's now enough fentanyl in our country to kill every American 7 times over. It is terrifying. Kids are going on TikTok, Snapchat, and they are able to go push something that looks like an electrical plug, emoji. They put that on, and all of a sudden, a menu of drugs comes across their screen. And these kids are able to buy this, and they use their Venmo accounts. It's crazy, and it's delivered to your home with maybe your McDonald's to hamburger, your submarine sandwich, your salad. The parents don't have any clue that their kids are buying this medicine. It is coming there. It is laced with fentanyl. If you do not buy something in a drugstore, like CVS, Walgreens, whatever, you can be sure that you are going to have a lethal dose of something, and you are going to need Narcan. Most kids are not drug addicts, and they're dying trying something the very first time. It is deadly. It is scary. Our kids are being preyed upon, and it's not that they're bad kids. This is a horrible thing. They're trying to find vulnerable kids. They're getting it on playgrounds. They're getting it everywhere, and we need to do everything we can to stop it. But since, Narcan exists, it's really important. If somebody passes out from an opiate overdose, any opiate, that does include, fentanyl, whatever, you don't know if someone's passed out, you don't know what they passed out from. If you happen to give them Narcan and that's not what they passed out from, it's not going to hurt them. So it's a really good idea, no matter what. If somebody's unconscious and you have Narcan, you should give it to them, because you can save a life like that. So I interrupted.
Okay. Thanks, Nancy. David, do you want to go ahead and tell us about Ibogaine, please?
Sure. So it's great to be with you all. I'm the director of the UC Davis Institute for Psychedelics and Neurotherapeutics, and today I'm going to tell you about an atypical psychedelic called Ibogaine. You may have heard of it. It's been in the popular press quite a lot lately, but the truth is we've known about this drug for decades. There is a ton of evidence that suggests that Ibogaine can produce both rapid and sustained therapeutic effects after a single administration across a number of different substance use disorders. Definitely for opioid use disorder, but also potentially for stimulants and alcohol use disorders. And moreover, there's a lot of evidence that Ibogaine can treat co-occurring conditions like depression, and maybe even things like cognitive impairment in traumatic brain injury. So you might be asking yourself, well, why hasn't Ibogaine become a medication approved in this country? And there's really, 3 major issues that have prevented Ibogaine from becoming a widespread therapeutic. Number one, it's very, very difficult to access. Its chemical structure is incredibly complex, and that has prevented chemists from being able to make it from scratch. Most of the drugs that we have to treat brain conditions are synthesized from scratch, and because of Ibogaine's complexity, we have to get it from botanical sources, plant sources that typically come from West Africa. And as you can imagine, obtaining large quantities of a drug like this from plant sources, often comes with major issues, major environmental challenges, major cultural issues, major political factors in having a stable supply of that drug. And so I'm very happy to say that, after nearly a decade of some really hard work for some talented chemists in our institute, we're finally getting closer to being able to produce Ibogaine purely synthetically from scratch, if you will, in the kind of quantities that we might need for clinical treatment. Now, I'm very hopeful that some patients will be able to benefit from ibogaine, but the compound still suffers from a couple of other things that is never going away that limit its clinical scalability. One of which is its hallucinogenic effects, which really necessitates in-clinic administration. And the other one is its effects on the heart. Ibogaine binds to an ion channel in the heart that can lead to cardiac arrhythmias, and several people have actually died while using ibogaine to treat their opioid use disorder. And so in order to solve that problem, we have tried to chemically evolve ibogaine into better versions of itself, versions that retained the therapeutic effects, but reduce or eliminate the hallucinogenic and the cardiotoxicity effects. And I'm very excited to say that a few of these molecules are starting to emerge. We have a lot more work to do to come up with optimized molecules before we enter human clinical trials, but I think the future is very, very bright for these ibogaine analogs. And finally, I just want to say that, historically, the federal government has not funded research on psychedelics, and I'm very grateful for organizations like CAN and the very generous private philanthropists out there who have made our work possible. Thank you.
Also, if you have, I see a few questions. Dana, do you want to grab some questions? So we'll answer your questions after the next speaker, right?
Great. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Adam Kaplan, who's the CSO at MyMD Pharmaceuticals, and he's going to discuss public health policy and substance use disorder. Adam, please.
I hope you don't mind. I'm going to use my prerogative to change here. And the reason, let me just tell you, is that this turns out to be very close to the 3-year anniversary of the death of my nephew due to an accidental fentanyl overdose. And Nancy was instrumental in talking to my sister and getting her through that. So here you'll have to indulge a midlife crisis psychiatrist who has been working on poetry for the past 3 months, because I wrote a poem. And it's not roses are red, violets are... Okay, so addiction is a con man who secretly hides his tells. His promises a slippery slope to a kaleidoscope of hells. What starts as an escape to a better space and time becomes spending every penny on an industry of crime. One day a sudden knock on my door came as a surprise. On opening there was my sister with tears in her eyes. Her son's addiction made us fear one day we'd get the call. Now she was wrapped in sadness and shame like a shawl. The stigma of addiction is a shadow that chills. Judgment and shame become part of what kills. With roots deep in biology, it's called a disease. With no cure in hand, a locked door without keys. Addictus, a Roman slave who in servitude lives. The term addict from what the Latin root gives. Bound not by shackles of iron or chains of steel, but by cravings unrelenting, he is compelled to feel. The very first high, a flood of dopamine, brings a moment of bliss, nirvana so serene. Yet in a very short time, the use is just to survive, to fix what is broken, find a reason to stay alive. Dealers like puppeteers pull on their strings with fentanyl specter and the danger it brings, a game of numbers to them like Russian roulette. Every life gambled on a mercenary's bet. 1 million people overdosed since 1999 are gone, faded, then eclipsed like stars by the dawn. That's daily 330 journeys abruptly come to an end, families cheating time with what-ifs trying to mend. My nephew is charming and creative, easy to recall. To him, someone's caste and standing didn't matter at all. When he ventured out into the world, he never met a stranger. It was his thirst for endless experiences that put him in danger. Alone one night, a devastating, irresistible mistake. A pill laced with fentanyl, his last breath it did take. Over time, risk becomes so familiar it's overlooked, until an appointment with fate can't be unbooked. His mother, my sister, bore overwhelming grief, a pain so profound it was far beyond my belief. Ashamed until she discovered, in shared despair, a bond of loss with another mother to share. So yes, there's life after a loved one's death, in memories spoken between words and breath. In our inextinguishable love, they forever dwell. In the stories of their lives, we continue to tell. Before passing judgment, brave taking a closer look. These are the most addicting drugs mankind has ever took. Current drugs in use are potent well beyond compare with life's other priorities they are unwilling to share. Who's never swayed by excesses of food or love may cast the first stone from his perch above. We all can falter in search of our strongest desire. Chasing what we crave, our dreams never tire. So how do we win this existential drug fight? Not by a war on the sick, but with a guiding light. Find treatments for cravings, the drugs will go away. In their place, we can help rebuild lives gone astray. Exchange love and compassion for guns and ammunition. Perhaps then citizens and politicians will listen. With new treatments and understanding of modern addiction, we will find the difference between us and them is pure fiction.
That is so awesome. You wrote that?
Yes, I did.
Oh my God. It's very,
I can't tell you how long I've slaved over this to try to make it not a total embarrassment. But thank you for endorsing it.
Congratulations, that's very touching and meaningful on every possible level.
We want copies.
Yeah, can you send it to Liz? Maybe she could print it out.
Sure.
All right, and she'll send it to everybody.
Our bias.
Registered, nobody's gonna,
Good point.
wow. Okay, so should.
Yeah, well, thanks for all the wonderful presentations. Thanks, everybody. Fantastic.
Unbelievable.
We're going to head now to the lightning round and answer some questions from the audience and from online as well. And one of the first questions here is there any evidence that GLP-1 drugs would impact cravings from benzodiazepines? Scott, have any thoughts on that?
I'm not aware of evidence. Part of what does excite me about the GLP-1 agonist approach to addiction is that it could be an approach that cuts across all addictions. It seems to have an impact on excessive food intake, excessive alcohol intake. So I think it's a hypothesis worth pursuing. It could really apply across all use disorders.
Thanks. Let's see. Has there been a gene identified for addiction? And if so, is there any type of targeted gene therapy under review? Good. Kelly?
So genetic analyses are very complex, and I don't know that there's firm consensus in the field that the gene has been identified, but there has recently been a panel that was cleared by the FDA that it's a series of genes that they think is meaningfully related to the risk of developing opioid use disorder. So I think that there's interest in moving into that field. It's an area of incredible innovation and growth. I don't know, again, I don't think that the field has firm consensus, but certainly there's movement in that direction. As far as gene therapy, I don't know that we are there yet, but certainly if we can start to identify these meaningful relationships, then we can move to that.
Thanks, Kelly. There are complications from today's polysubstance disorder. How would a practitioner best detox and treat long-term benzodependence and opiate addiction? Is rapid detox safer than treating each dependency one at a time? Is there a need to study this? Ned, any thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, I would say that we know a lot about how to withdraw patients from drugs like benzodiazepines and opiates. Probably the most important message I'd like to get across is, well, two. One is that detoxification is a kind of stigmatizing term, and it also, so we prefer the term withdrawal. And also, I think it's important to place more evidence on what happens after you get the patient stabilized and off the medication that they're taking, and particularly for opioids, withdrawal of the opioids by themselves without following that up with one of the effective medications is probably a bad idea for most patients. If someone is on opioids and comes off opioids and then is back out in the world, they may do well and not relapse, but if they relapse, they're at risk for an overdose. And we have medications, buprenorphine, methadone, long-acting injection naltrexone that would be protective. So many of us in the field would like to see so-called detoxification units, for example, rebranded as stabilization units, where the effort is largely to stabilize patients on the treatment that they're going to stay on after they finish. And for opiate use disorder, that would be one of the effective medications that we have. Benzodiazepines, we don't have maintenance medications in the same way. And so there's more work that needs to be done on the benzodiazepines. Although I think in many cases, if you stabilized the opioid use disorder, the benzodiazepine problem might get better, might kind of follow.
Great. Thanks, Ned. Here's an interesting question. If fentanyl addiction results in long-term effects on the prefrontal cortex, we got scientists out there, should it be considered a disability? Sharon, any thoughts on that?
So I think my general disposition is that addiction to fentanyl, addiction to heroin, addiction to alcohol, addiction to cocaine, in their moderate to severe forms, are disabling. I think that if you've lived with anybody that has a moderate to severe use disorder, you would agree. Or if you've suffered from one, it's disabling because it prevents you from doing all the other things that make life meaningful. In fact, the criteria for diagnosing somebody with a substance use disorder often has to do with features that you would think are related to being disabled, not being able to do your daily functions, having your drug use or alcohol use interfere with those things. So I think that there's a lot of attention on fentanyl right now because it's so damn deadly. But in reality, I think that all people who are really suffering from the more significant forms of substance use disorders truly are disabled until we can get them into remission and then into long-term recovery.
Thanks. A question, again, for Ned maybe here. Should ibogaine therapy be followed by buprenorphine to mitigate relapse risk and fatal overdose?
Ibogaine, well, we need to know more about ibogaine therapy, and I think we've heard about, some of the research going on, and we have MASH in the audience, who's one of the other real leaders in the development of the effort to develop ibogaine. I'm not sure if, as a clinician, if someone comes to me with opiate use disorder right now, I wouldn't feel in a position to recommend ibogaine because it's not an approved treatment. So I would move that person. Well, what we like to think about is a shared decision making where you sit down with the patient and say there are actually two, maybe even three really good options, medication treatments for opiate use disorder. There's methadone maintenance, there's buprenorphine maintenance, there's even extended release injection naltrexone. And here's what we know about them, and let's talk about your situation, and what do you think would work best for you? And then you have a discussion and make a shared choice, really, with the individual.
Deborah, do you have something you want to add to that?
Just from the real world experience where we worked with ibogaine and safely transition patients to abstinence, and there were 277 of them, many of whom were opioid dependent patients who had tried the standard of care and had really a hard road back to any kind of maintenance of sobriety, we recommended naltrexone. And so I think that that's a legitimate question and an approach. And also, we think about patient journey and what clinicians are faced with very difficult patients. And wouldn't this be a wonderful way for patients and their clinicians to make a decision? Do you have the opportunity of a medically safe, with medical oversight, physician detoxification, and then have withdrawal management, and then to have the clinician and patient to make a decision? Yes, I want to go on buprenorphine. And would their outcomes be longer? Would their outcomes be longer? Would the neuroplasticity and the elegant work that David Olson is doing, would that window of neuroplasticity be open? Would we see better outcomes? And so, ultimately, I think the novel compounds that are coming out will have a better safety profile that are based on lead molecules, ibogaine and noribogaine, are going to inform this. And I hope I live to see it. But it's a great question. And I just think, ibogaine, for me, ibogaine use, of course, I've been, I've spoken about it, also to have the naltrexone.
Is there any research on foods that can be helpful in fighting addiction? Anybody want to tackle that?
I think chocolate. It makes you feel good.
Here's one. Are there any withdrawal effects when Ozempic type meds are discontinued? I'll let some of the other people describe that, but I will point out
Just
that
get hungry.
Scott, do you want to look at that one?
So we didn't see any immediate rebound from the study trial that we had. Now, these medications have been out there for quite a while. Usually, we don't hear a whole lot about problems when people come off. Earlier versions had shorter half-lives, so there was less impact, and people stopped. And what we know is that, for instance, with a lot of what is used for weight reduction, is a lot of folks gain the weight back. But we don't see immediate rebound effects on respiratory. We didn't see anything on heart rates. We didn't see anything in terms of a physiological problem that might be a risk. But again, these meds have been out there for years, and people come off them all the time. And I'm not aware of any particular.
Yeah, I agree with that. I haven't heard anything about withdrawal symptoms per se, acute withdrawal symptoms. The appetite is likely to come back, but you hope that the person has been working with their clinicians on lifestyle changes. Lower calorie diets, more exercise, more muscle development, and so forth that can actually maintain the amount of the weight loss once it's achieved.
And I think that speaks to the previous question as well, in terms of, is there a particular food that, no. Is one's overall diet and the way you eat? Yes, we know that has an impact on the way your brain functions, the way your body functions, and also your own motivations. And so you can't eat healthy, but I'm not aware of any one food that's magic.
My son's all over the keto diet, but I don't know if there's how much science there really is behind it.
Right.
I tried it once.
Okay,
I felt
any other questions from the audience?
I have one.
Please.
I'm kind of, Nancy is one of my dearest friends, and I think it's so amazing what she's doing. And we had lunch, and we had been talking about it, and thank God, I just turned 35 years sober on December 6th, and it was
Congratulations.
a miracle. And one of the things that you said, David, and what I believe for myself was trauma is definitely trauma. Whether I remember or I don't remember, but one of the things that you said was the psychedelic part. When I got sober, I was it was progressive. But my father had passed away quickly and went into a deep depression. And I had never taken acid or anything like that. And my roommate's boyfriend had wanted to take a trip to Vegas, and that sounded good to me, and he asked me if I knew anybody who had acid. So I did, but I had never taken it. And so he gave me some. And as sure as I'm sitting here, that particular psychedelic, I never took it again after that. It completely, it changed everything on my feelings about my father's death. And I remember that, and that was, I don't know, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 60 years ago. So when you talk about the hallucinogenics part, I do believe that there's definitely something there, because over the time from that, going through other trauma experiences, I had done mushrooms or something, and then had relieved some of that. So I'm a firm believer in that, in that kind of hallucinogenics. You talked about that, is it called Ibogaine?
Ibogaine.
Yeah, so a friend of mine had gone to Mexico and has been telling me her experience with that, and they had a doctor there, hooked her up to a heart monitor and everything like that, and she swears by that. I mean, it's completely changed her life. She opened a boutique, she's happy. So I do believe that there's something, in the hallucinogenics.
Yeah, Adam, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, so thanks for sharing that.
And I lost my nephew 14 years ago to fentanyl.
Yeah. Very sorry for you. So the thing I wanted to bring up, and Glynis, with her amazing sort of story, emphasized this, and I'm not addressing the psychedelic part so much as the depression, is just so, make sure people understand that just like you need a multidisciplinary team of care providers to help you get through something like substance use disorder, you also have to have a multi-pronged approach, because if you're depressed, have heroin addiction and chronic pain, for instance, what I tell my patients is, you can get rid of the heroin and the chronic pain, but if you're depressed, you don't feel any better. And similarly, if you get rid of the depression and the heroin, and you're in chronic pain, which led perhaps to the addiction. So for people who have had the experience of, oh, gee, it doesn't work for me, it may not work for you if you will not feel a lick better if you don't address all of the problems simultaneously.
Exactly, and that's the trauma part, being in some kind of therapy, group therapy and things like that, after the fact, that really was a two-pronged thing and it's a constant. It's not just like, it's a constant thing.
Yeah.
But I think it's so amazing what you guys are doing here, and it's really opening my eyes up a lot, because my belief is always a spiritual, how do you say, and now I can't pronounce it. Spiritual malady? Yeah, you said it before. Yes, a spiritual malady where it's a lack, and so through a lot of meditation and going to India and doing this whole spiritual thing, that has guided me, has kept me, through the years, that solid thing. So I think it's a combination. Maybe it's a three-prong.
Maybe it's a four-prong. Biopsychosocial, spiritual.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thanks everybody for coming.
Okay, and I'm gonna, okay, sorry. Okay, anyway, thank you all so much. I'm always floored by how brilliant everybody is here. Thank you, Dr. Kurt Rasmussen, helping, get everybody, coordinate everybody, make it happen. Thank you. You are, the day that I walked into NIDA and met him was like, it just opened up the gates, and he knows everything, everybody, everywhere. He knows where every bone is buried in this world of addiction. I was failing miserably when I first started this charity with my son Jason Davis, and I felt, oh my God, this is really rough. And here we are today. To me, this is like a miracle. It's a dream come true that we're here. And unfortunately, Jason passed passed away 4 years ago, very recently. But I know today Jason's just sitting here on my shoulder and smiling, and his word to everybody would be thank you so much. But he also say to all of you doctors, go big or go home. This is not big enough. We have to do, 10 times more. And when you look at the severity of a disease like this, and that, how somebody's dying every 5 minutes of an overdose, and, heart disease is terrible and cancer is terrible, but more people are dying of this. Like, why are we looking the other way? It's just, it's overwhelming. And why are we shaming people? Why are we making people feel bad? You don't sign up to have a disease. It just comes into your life. And we need to love, we need to hug, we need to respect everybody that has any disease. Nobody's asking for a disease. So I'm so grateful that everyone's here today. I know a lot of people are watching this online, and I just feel like the loss of my son was the worst thing I could have ever experienced. He was everything in the world and fun and had such a future, but I feel like he's sitting here today, and we have to do better. We have to do more. We have to raise a heck of a lot more money. We have to be able to fund way more studies, and it's just got to happen. And we have to stop, thinking in the old way that these people have a choice. They're making bad choices. They're not smart. They're not this. Everybody's smart. Everybody has feelings. Every life is so precious. Every life matters. If you love somebody, that life is yours, and whatever happens to them happens to you. And as having a loved one, if you're the parent or you're the child of somebody that's an addict, or whoever it is that you love, that's your friend, there's no reason not to care about each and every addict in this world. They matter. They're important. Their lives matter. So I thank you so much.